Judge Williams, also a former employee, testified Kelly always seemed to be in the company of very young girls. Williams started working for Kelly in 2003, hoping to become an audio engineer. But he says in the 9 months he worked for Kelly, he never touched any audio equipment. Instead, he says he was a glorified receptionist who answered phones and assisted Kelly's girlfriends. And he says he was told, never look at the ladies in the eye and never talk to them. Williams said Kelly seemed to always be angry and he liked to yell. After 9 months, Williams said he quit because it was a hostile work environment and he wasn't comfortable with the things he was seeing.
Day 16, September 14, 2021. Witness Nicholas Williams worked for the defendant in his music studio as an intern when he was 19 and had hopes of moving into a sound engineer position. As an employee of Kelly, he said the most direct rule from Kelly was no interaction with his female guests. Williams said he was tasked with manning the front desk and answering the phone. He said Kelly would often have female guests stay at the studio after a show. He noted that they were all very young. If he received any messages from female guests that were staying in any of the studio's bedrooms, he had to write down the messages and take it directly to Kelly. Most of the messages he received were requests for food for the women. Anytime I had to take food to them, they took the food, looked down, and closed the door. He said, there was no conversation. He said, they seemed sad. He testified that Kelly's male visitors, actors, musicians, personal trainers were free to move about the studio, but his female guests were not. A blackout ordered from Kelly meant none of the employees could go upstairs and the rooms were off limits to everyone. During blackouts, no one was permitted to move around upstairs in the studio except for Kelly and members of his inner circle. Williams also described another code that he had for any impeding visits from Kelly's wife, who was usually escorted by a personal assistant. The code word for Kelly's wife was important, and a visit from her required him to write important on a piece of paper and take it to Kelly as soon as he could. It meant that none of his female guests could be around. Sparks flew when Williams attempted to address Kelly personally. I wanted to look him in the eye, he started to say before an objection was raised and lawyers huddled at sidebar. When the sidebar broke up, Williams asked the judge if he could say something. The judge stopped him and instructed him to simply answer the question. On cross-examination, defense attorney R.KELLY suggests Williams was a disgruntled employee who never got the opportunity to work as a sound engineer. On cross, defense attorney R.KELLY suggested that Williams was nothing but a disgruntled employee who had ambitions to become a sound engineer but never got past his $6 an hour job as a receptionist. Williams conceded he wanted to be an engineer and left because he wasn't given the opportunity. Though on redirect, he testified he found a career in live sound production.
Well, you know, it helps the prosecution by putting R.KELLY in a position where he is managing everything that's going on, whether he's managing how to move girlfriends around, whether he's managing where they should be sleeping, where they can't sleep, when they can and cannot eat. What we are getting to with the prosecution is creating a picture where R.KELLY is the one in charge. And this points to this whole idea that if he's in charge, if he's docking pay when people don't do what he says they are supposed to do, then this definitely becomes a problem where you have people working in an effort to do something for R.KELLY. And that's what the the prosecution wants to set up. They want to put him in charge. They want to put him in a position where he is telling people what to do, so that they can see him in this light, that he is this person that tells people what to do and how things should unfold. So when my wife is coming, I want that notification so I can hide my girlfriend. So this is good and strong for the prosecution.
Another former employee, Alesiette Mayweather, served as Kelly's personal assistant for 6 months. She testified that part of her duties involved escorting Kelly's girlfriends on shopping and various other excursions to get manicures or massages. She testified these services or transactions could not be handled by men. And should the girls encounter a man in an elevator, they had to turn their back towards the door. Mayweather also sent frequent texts to her boss to let him know details of their whereabouts, indicating where they were going and when they returned. Prosecutors introduced a series of text messages sent to her friend in which she raised concern over the detention of one of Kelly's girlfriends, who was kept in a room in the studio for at least 36 hours. The judge ruled this morning on a motion to admit video and audio recordings of Kelly threatening his alleged victims. Day 17, September 15, 2021. Juries deciding the fate of Robert Kelly viewed a number of videotapes Wednesday, including one that the judge warned may be somewhat upsetting. None of the videotapes or recordings that the juries viewed or heard was transmitted to the overflow room, making it exceedingly frustrating for journalists trying to cover the trial. After the prosecution announced the recordings would be published to the jury only, the court went silent while everyone in the courtroom donned headsets to watch and listen to the videotapes. There were a number of recordings, including a video and audio recording purporting to show the defendant physically and verbally abusing and threatening unidentified women. The recordings were played over the objections of the defense after the judge ruled they were admissible to show how the defendant maintained control over his alleged victims. Also, prosecutors also introduced other videos, including a few which feature Kelly, a woman named Dominique, and a male witness by the name of Alex, who testified earlier this week that he met Kelly at one of his parties when he was 17 and eventually became his lover at the age of 20. Alex testified that he participated in a number of threesomes that included the defendant. He went on to say that there were countless such sexual encounters and that they were recorded by Kelly on his iPad. Government witness Ryan Chabot, a case agent for the Department of Homeland Security, testified about items recovered from the searches of the defendant Trump Tower apartment and a storage unit Kelly had. Chabot introduced a number of letters recovered from the search warrants. Prosecutors read excerpts from the letters written by some of his alleged victims. The portions read by the prosecutor ranged from the girls groveling and asking for forgiveness for disappointing or failing Kelly in some way. Also among the items recovered in the searches were what appeared to be altered ID cards for Jerronda Pace. The cards reflected a birth date of April 19, 1990, 3 years older than her actual birth year of 1993. Pace was the government's first witness, testifying that she became sexually involved with the defendant at the age of 16. She described in graphic detail how the defendant allegedly trained her to sexually please him, taking her virginity and giving her herpes. Pace said the defendant knew she was 16 when they had sexual intercourse, but he allegedly told her to pretend to be 19.
Well, you know, all this time we have heard, almost a month now, of witnesses saying what he said, what he did, how he acted. But this is the first time that the jurors get an insight and hear his voice. To hear his voice, and if it was anything like the Gayle King interview, it might have been that piercing voice that we heard when he got really noticeably and disturbingly mad. So to put that with all of these other stories, you know, you can perhaps more than just think about him doing it, but you can actually see him doing it in their minds and kind of connect the dots. And that's what the prosecution wants. They want the jury to connect the dots. You don't think that R. Kelly could do something like this, and that he, you know, was created these beautiful songs, I Believe I Can Fly, and he's maybe perhaps played at your wedding. But listen to this guy now. Now you have him in your ear. He is in your earphones. What does this sound like to you? Does this sound like a nice man? Or does this sound like a man who would do some of the things that we've been talking about for the past 4 weeks? And this is what they want the jury to do. And it's easier for them to put this together and conceivably see him doing these things.